A former Marine returns home after 12 years, only to be mocked by a powerful businessman who hands him a broken mountain cabin, a rotting shack with a collapsing roof, shattered windows, and snow drifting through the cracks. But everything changes when his loyal German shepherd suddenly stops, ears raised, and digs into the snow, uncovering a hidden wooden hatch buried beneath the ground. Inside the hatch are forged documents, mineral maps worth millions, and evidence connecting a deadly fire to the very man who tried to destroy his family. The cabin that looked worthless becomes the key to exposing everything. This is a story about truth rising from ruins, a soldier who refuses to give up, a dog who senses danger before anyone else, and a miracle hidden in a place no one believed in. If you want to see how justice, courage, and faith collide, stay with me. And before we begin, please subscribe, leave a comment, and thank you for being here. May God bless you as you watch. The winter sun hung low above the rugged plains of Montana, casting long, pale beams across the small mountain town of Red Valley. Cold wind swept down from the northern ridge, carrying the metallic bite of oncoming snowfall and stirring loose flakes along the sidewalks. Snow clung stubbornly to the rooftops and gutter edges, and the distant pine forest rustled like a warning. Red Valley, once warm in Jack's memory, now felt harsh and unwelcoming, its quiet streets echoing a life he had not lived for 12 long years. Jack Morgan stepped off the interstate bus, a heavy duffel slung over his shoulder and the loyal figure of Rex walking close by his leg. Jack, now 34, stood tall and broad-shouldered, a body shaped by years in the United States Marine Corps. His dark brown hair was cut close, his jawline firm under a few days of scruff, and a thin scar across his left eyebrow hinted at a violent past encounter. His gray-blue eyes held the distant, watchful focus of a man who had seen too many battlefields and buried too many brothers. Beside him, Rex, a 5-year-old German shepherd, walked with disciplined alertness. The dog's thick sable coat bristled in the cold, and a faint limp in his right hind leg betrayed an old injury from an explosion during their final deployment. Rex's amber eyes scanned every passing car, every shifting shadow, loyal and ready, a creature shaped by trauma and training, yet gentle toward the man he trusted most. As they walked down Main Street, people stared, some with pity, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. Red Valley was the kind of town where secrets never stayed secret, and Jack's return was already part of the morning gossip. He ignored the whispers and stopped in front of a building he once knew like the back of his hand. Morgan Manufacturing. The company his father built with 30 years of sweat and sacrifice. But the building looked different now. Its old wooden doors replaced by polished steel, its modest sign swapped for a gleaming corporate logo. It felt wrong, artificial, like someone had taken his childhood and painted over it with money. Jack pushed inside. The lobby smelled of industrial cleaner instead of the faint scent of machine oil he remembered from visiting his father during school breaks. Behind the counter sat Karen Doyle, the company receptionist and one of his late mother's acquaintances. Karen was now in her early 50s, slender with soft blonde curls and pale skin that showed faint wrinkles from years of stress. She was known as a kind woman, but also a chronic worrier who fiddled with her wedding ring whenever anxious. And today, she was doing exactly that. Her voice trembled as she greeted him, and when he asked what had happened to the company, her eyes darted away. She explained cautiously that after the tragic warehouse fire that killed his parents, the company had fallen into financial emergency, forcing an immediate sale. Before Jack could question her further, The double doors to the executive hallway swung open. Ethan Harlow stepped out. Ethan was in his late 40s, tall but soft in the middle, with perfectly combed dark hair and an expensive charcoal suit that fit almost too well. His pale skin and cold brown eyes gave him a predatory look, the kind of man who smiled only when it benefited him. He had once been a business partner to Jack's father, but his reputation for ruthless deal-making had grown worse over the years. Ethan approached with a wide, practiced smile. His voice was smooth, dripping with fake sympathy as he spoke about unexpected tragedy and unavoidable circumstances. Jack stood still, jaw tight, sensing the insincerity behind every word. Then Ethan snapped his fingers. One of his associates, a stout man with a red wool scarf and a smirk, handed him a leather briefcase. Ethan opened it with theatrical flair and pulled out a manila folder. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it onto the counter. The slap echoed sharply across the lobby. Jack opened it. Inside was not restitution, not company paperwork, not an inheritance. It was a deed. To a dilapidated mountain cabin on the far outskirts of Red Valley. Ethan smirked, explaining in a tone dripping with condescension that this was the last remaining asset from the Morgan estate. He claimed he was generously giving it to Jack so the poor soldier wouldn't be homeless. Behind him, two of his business friends tried to hide their laughter. The man with the red scarf whispered, "Better than the cardboard box he probably expected." Rex growled low, ears flattening, muscles tense. Jack placed a steady hand on the dog's neck, calming him but refusing to break eye contact with Ethan. Jack wanted to punch him. He wanted to smash the arrogance off Ethan's face. But he also knew what would happen next. The police report, the headlines, the label of an unstable veteran. Ethan wanted him to snap, so Jack didn't. He straightened his back, looked Ethan dead in the eyes, and said calmly, "I'll take it." For a split second, Ethan's expression twitched, as if the script he had rehearsed did not include Jack accepting humiliation without reaction. But he quickly recovered and waved dismissively. "Try not to freeze up there," he mocked. "Winter's coming early." Jack picked up the deed, turned, and walked out. No anger, no outburst, just a man reclaiming his dignity in silence. He stepped back onto the snow-dusted street with Rex walking faithfully beside him. The cold wind bit at his face as he passed familiar places. The church steeple, the grocery store, the old schoolyard where he had once played baseball with his father cheering from the bleachers. But now, he walked alone. He had lost his family, his home, and his legacy. With nothing left to anchor him in, Red Valley, Jack started toward the road leading into the mountains, toward the broken cabin Ethan had thrown at him like trash, toward the place that would become the beginning of a truth he had not yet uncovered. He had no idea that the cabin was not a joke. It was a doorway. And everything in his life was about to change because of it. The mountain road twisted upward through dense pine forests, the snow growing thicker as Jack and Rex pushed farther from town. The cold bit deep, and each breath escaped as a thin cloud. But Jack felt strangely grounded here, far from the polished lies of Ethan Harlow, far from the stairs in Red Valley. By the time they reached the cabin, daylight was fading into the steel-gray tones of a winter evening. The structure stood crookedly against the wind, its roof bowed inward, its porch sinking slightly to one side. The wooden exterior was weathered to a dull silver, and several boards hung loose as though one strong gust might tear them free. Rex sniffed the perimeter cautiously, tail low, ears flicking at each creak of old timber. Inside, The air was musty, cold, tinged with the faint scent of mold and long-forgotten memories. Jack clicked on his flashlight and swept it across the room. The cabin was small, just a single main room with a kitchenette corner, a narrow hallway, and what looked like a storage closet at the far end. Dust coated every surface, and a collapsed chair lay beside a stone fireplace filled with rotting firewood. Yet something about the place felt familiar. Not visually, Jack had never been here, but emotionally, as if the walls held pieces of the man who raised him. He dropped his duffel and began clearing debris, stacking broken boards against the wall, shaking dust off the counters. Rex followed him closely, muzzle brushing cabinets and corners. Jack reached the storage closet door, its hinges rusted but still functional, and tugged it open. Inside was a collection of old blankets, a cracked lantern, and beneath it all, a wooden box covered in grime. The box was about the size of a toolbox, its lid carved with initials he recognized instantly. H.M., Henry Morgan, his father. Jack's chest tightened as he lifted the box and carried it to the center of the room. He knelt, brushed dirt from the lid, and opened it. Inside were neatly packed documents and items, far too carefully arranged for a man who ever planned to abandon them. The first object Jack pulled out was a work journal, its leather cover cracked from age. When he flipped through its pages, he saw his father's handwriting, strong and precise. The entries detailed daily business matters, but shifted tone halfway through. Henry wrote about financial irregularities he discovered, discrepancies he traced back to Ethan Harlow's division. He wrote about contracts Ethan insisted he sign, contracts Henry found suspicious. The words became more urgent over time, Henry recording meetings that made him uneasy, accounting sheets that didn't add up, and a growing conviction that Ethan was manipulating the company from within. The journal ended abruptly 2 days before the fire. Next, Jack uncovered copies of the vague, questionable contracts Ethan had once forced his father to sign, agreements that shifted ownership percentages, gave Ethan control over key decisions, and allowed him to access company funds under the pretext of emergency business expansions. Jack had never seen any of these before. Tucked beneath the papers was a thin folder filled with geological diagrams, a preliminary mineral survey of the mountain region. It looked incomplete, but enough was there to understand the implications. Someone had found traces of valuable metal deposits in the area. Henry had circled certain sections and scribbled notes about needing independent verification and potential deception. At the bottom of the box was a small black memory card taped to an envelope. Jack lifted it carefully. A note paper-clipped to it read in his father's handwriting, "Backup. Give to lawyer if necessary." The envelope itself contained a half-finished letter addressed to an attorney in Billings, someone named David Crowley, a name Jack didn't recognize. The letter described a suspicion that Ethan had been using fraudulent contracts and possibly conducting private survey work behind Henry's back. It ended mid-sentence, as if Henry had been interrupted before finishing it. Jack leaned back on the worn cabin floorboards, breath unsteady. This place wasn't trash. This was a vault of everything Henry had been trying to protect, everything he never had the chance to expose. Rex padded over and rested his head against Jack's knee, sensing his distress. Jack stroked the dog's fur slowly, grounding himself. He stood and walked to the window. Snow drifted gently across the tree line, and the sky had deepened into a dark blue. This cabin had once belonged to his father long before Jack was born. Why had Henry kept these papers here? Why not in the house or at the factory? The answer formed slowly, because Henry didn't trust anyone. not the company office, not even their home. This remote cabin was the only place safe enough to hide evidence of Ethan's actions. Jack took a slow breath and looked around the room, not with despair this time, but with a steady resolve. The cabin needed repairs. The roof was failing, the insulation nearly non-existent, and the fireplace needed clearing. But if his father had trusted this place, then Jack would too. He decided he would stay here, fix it, and continue the investigation Henry had started. The truth had been buried once. It would not be buried again. Rex nudged Jack's hand, and Jack placed the memory card securely in his pocket. "Good boy," he murmured. "We're staying, and we're going to finish what Dad started." Outside, the wind howled softly against the cabin walls. Inside, for the first time since returning to Red Valley, Jack felt a purpose stronger than grief. The cabin was no insult. It was the key. The morning after Jack discovered his father's documents, the snow had settled thick across the mountainside, turning the entire forest into a white, quiet expanse. Frost glimmered on every branch, and the sky hung low with gray clouds that promised more snowfall by evening. Jack stepped outside with Rex at his heel, determined to understand exactly why Ethan Harlow had been so desperate to claim this land. The cold bit at his skin, but he welcomed it. It kept his thoughts sharp. He began by walking the perimeter around the cabin, scanning the ground for anything unusual. The terrain sloped gently downward behind the cabin, where a large outcrop of dark rock jutted from the frozen soil. Rex's ears perked up the moment they neared it. The German shepherd lowered his nose, sniffing intensely, tail stiff, pacing in tight circles. Jack crouched beside him, running his hand along the rough stone surface. There was nothing visible, but Rex's instincts had saved their lives before. Jack trusted them implicitly. He grabbed a small hand shovel from his pack and began to dig where Rex kept returning. The ground was hard and icy, but after several minutes of effort, Jack struck something different. Softer soil mixed with chunks of tarnished metal-bearing rocks. When he held one up, even through the layer of frost, he could see veins of greenish-blue copper, streaks of silver-gray nickel, and flecks that shimmered faintly under the light. These were not ordinary stones. These were the kind of mineral deposits companies fought over, deposits that could change the fortune of whoever controlled the land. Jack's breath hitched. This wasn't speculation anymore. His father had been right to be wary. He pocketed a few samples, brushed the dirt off his gloves, and stood in silence as the cold wind whispered through the trees. The truth began to form in his mind. Ethan Harlow hadn't just stolen the company. He had stolen the company to control this land, because he already suspected, maybe even knew, that something valuable lay beneath it. The mysterious contracts, the forced signatures, the rushed sale after the fire, they all connected perfectly now. Jack recalled a name from one of the documents. Peter Langford, a mining engineer mentioned briefly in the geological notes. If Ethan had hired a private survey, this man might have been part of it. Jack returned inside the cabin and spread the papers across the floor. His father's notes included a business card paper-clipped into the folder, something Jack had overlooked before. The card belonged to Dr. Benjamin Keller, a 50-something geologist from Bozeman. The card described Keller as a mineral exploration consultant. Jack studied the name. Keller was reputed across Montana for his sharp analytical skills and for being honest to a fault, an unusual trait in a field where money often overshadowed ethics. Old articles online described him as a rugged-looking scientist with a square jaw, thick eyebrows, and a trimmed white beard. Even in photographs, he had a stern, no-nonsense look, like a man who had seen too many corporations twist data for profit. One article mentioned he had publicly criticized unethical mining contracts years ago and was ostracized for it. If Keller had been involved, even indirectly, he might know what Ethan was hiding. Rex nudged Jack's elbow gently, sensing the tension. Jack rested a hand on Rex's head. "We're getting closer, boy." As Jack sorted more documents, he noticed a second name scribbled faintly in the corner of a map. Samuel Rivers. Unlike Keller, Rivers wasn't a scientist or an engineer. He was a former field laborer who had worked several short-term mining jobs around the county. Jack remembered hearing rumors years ago that Rivers had a drinking problem after losing his brother in a mining accident, and he had grown suspicious of any company that cut corners. If Ethan had pressured the workers, Rivers might have noticed, but Jack also understood something else. If Ethan realized Jack was digging into the land, both literally and figuratively, he wouldn't sit quietly. He had already tried to humiliate Jack. He had already taken everything else from the Morgan family. What would he do now that Jack had returned to the very land Ethan wanted? Jack stood and looked out the window. The wind had picked up, making the trees sway. Somewhere down the mountain lay Red Valley, and somewhere in that town was Ethan Harlow. Likely smug, likely confident Jack would soon give up. But Ethan had never known the Marine Jack had become. He had never known the discipline, the persistence, the stubborn resolve that war had burned into him. Jack tightened his jaw. "You won't take this too," he whispered. Rex barked softly, as if in answer. Jack grabbed the mineral samples and placed them beside the documents. His father had died trying to uncover the truth. The fire wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. Henry Morgan had been silenced, but his evidence survived. And now Jack carried that weight. The cabin might have been meant as a joke, a humiliation, but instead, it had become the heart of a buried war. A war Ethan believed he had already won. He was wrong. This was only the beginning. The snowstorm arrived overnight, coating the mountains with a thick white blanket that muted every sound except the occasional groan of ice-heavy branches. By morning, the wind had calmed, but the cold was sharper than before, biting through Jack's jacket as he stepped outside to gather firewood. Rex trotted beside him, the 5-year-old German shepherd alert despite the freezing temperature. His black and tan coat dusted with snow. His ears flicked constantly, scanning the surroundings the way only a trained military dog could. Jack relied on those instincts as much as he relied on his own. As Jack chopped a fallen log into smaller pieces, Rex suddenly froze, nose pointed toward the tree line. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Jack immediately straightened. "What is it, boy?" Rex barked once, a sharp, urgent sound, then dashed toward a patch of snow-covered ground downhill from the cabin. Jack followed, boots crunching through snow, heart picking up speed. Rex circled a mound where the snow looked slightly sunken, as if something large lay buried beneath. Jack knelt and brushed away layers of snow with his gloves. Beneath it, he found a metal handle, rusted and half-broken. He cleared more snow, revealing a heavy wooden hatch reinforced with old iron bands. The structure looked decades old, possibly built when his father first surveyed the land as a young man. Jack gripped the handle and pulled, but it didn't budge. He tried again with both hands, muscles straining, until finally the hatch groaned open with a crack of frozen wood. A stale, cold draft rushed out from the darkness below. Rex whined softly, tail low but eyes locked on the opening. Jack switched on his flashlight and climbed down the ladder into a cramped underground storage room. The air smelled of old oil, dust, and metal untouched by time. Crates lined the walls, and a metal cabinet stood in the corner, its surface rusted but intact. Jack's flashlight flicked across the room and caught something on a workbench, a stack of waterproof folders, still sealed. His pulse kicked up. He opened the first folder carefully. Inside was an invoice stamped and dated, electrical maintenance done on the Morgan warehouse the exact day his parents died. Except the signature belonged to a technician Jack recognized as having died 3 years earlier. It was fake. Jack's breath shuddered. The fire had not been an accident. Someone had tampered with the electrical system. Someone wanted them gone. He opened the next file, a fully detailed geological map of the land surrounding the cabin. The markings showed mineral density readings far more valuable than anything he had uncovered so far. Copper veins, nickel clusters, rare minerals in deep pockets. This map alone was worth millions. And someone, Ethan, had tried to erase it from existence. The third folder contained printed email exchanges between Ethan Harlow and a major mining corporation in Denver. The messages, negotiated covert drilling rights, land seizure strategies, and removal of obstacles. One line chilled Jack's spine. Once the Morgan assets are secured, we can proceed without legal complications. His father had written in his journal that Ethan was hiding something. Now the truth lay right before Jack. The final folder held something even worse. Ethan's old draft documents outlining a multi-year plan to force his parents into debt, seize Morgan Manufacturing, and eventually gain full control of the land once thought worthless to everyone but Ethan. Jack tightened his jaw, forcing himself to breathe. It wasn't incompetence or fate. It wasn't a tragic accident. It was orchestrated destruction. Rex nudged him, sensing the rising fury. Jack gathered all documents into his pack and climbed out of the bunker. Once outside, he scanned the snowy forest. Instincts sharpened. The world felt different now, like a battlefield where every shadow hid a danger. He returned to the cabin, lit a lantern, and laid the documents across the wooden table. The evidence formed a sinister timeline, each piece confirming a darker truth. Ethan Harlow had killed his parents indirectly, stolen the company, and now sought to claim the very mountain their family once called home. Jack wasn't going to let him. Knowing Ethan would react violently if he realized Jack had uncovered the truth, Jack made copies of every file. Then he saddled his pack, whistled to Rex, and trudged down the snowy trail to deliver them. His first stop was Sarah Winters, the ranch owner who had shown him kindness. Sarah was a tall, strong woman in her mid-30s, with sun-browned skin, long, dark hair braided down her back, and the steady confidence of someone who had spent her life working under open skies. Her intense brown eyes softened only when talking about justice or her late father. She read the documents with calm fury, hands tightening as she flipped each page. "You were right to bring this to me," she said. "He won't get away with this." Next, Jack visited Samuel Potter, the aging store owner with graying hair, deep wrinkles, and the reserved gentleness of a man who had seen too much corruption to be surprised by any of it. Samuel read the evidence, then nodded solemnly. "I've watched Ethan destroy good people for years. Maybe it's time someone finally stands up to him." Jack returned to the cabin exhausted but relieved. For the first time, he wasn't alone. But Ethan must have sensed the shift. That night, long after darkness settled, Rex growled again, this time toward the trail. Jack grabbed his rifle just as three silhouettes appeared between the trees. Ethan's men. Broad-shouldered, heavy-coated, and walking with the swagger of hired muscle. One carried a crowbar, another carried a bat. Jack stepped onto the porch, Rex baring his teeth beside him. The lead man sneered. "Boss says you've been sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Jack leveled his rifle calmly. "I'm not the one who should be worried." The standoff ended when Rex lunged at the nearest man, forcing them all to retreat. Jack didn't fire a shot, but he didn't need to. They knew he was ready to fight. Jack closed the cabin door and barred it. The documents on the table glowed under the lantern light like weapons of their own. It was time to take Ethan to court. The courthouse in Helena was overflowing long before the proceedings began. Snow drifted softly outside, but inside the air buzzed with tension. Locals from Red Valley, former employees of Morgan Manufacturing, ranchers, miners, reporters, everyone had come to witness the showdown between Jack Morgan, the disgraced Marine returning from nowhere, and Ethan Harlow, the man who had dominated business in the region for nearly 20 years. Jack sat at the plaintiff's table in a clean but worn shirt, his posture straight. Rex sitting calmly at his feet like a silent guardian. Beside him sat Catherine Moore, a sharp-faced attorney in her early 40s with short dark hair, angular features, and a presence that commanded the room. She was not glamorous, but carried an intensity that made even seasoned lawyers second-guess themselves. She had a reputation for refusing bribes, defying large corporations, and speaking with a crisp precision that cut through deception like a blade. Behind Jack were Sarah and Samuel, his only allies, both watching with quiet determination. Across the aisle sat Ethan Harlow with a wall of attorneys in tailored suits. Ethan himself wore a black wool coat and silk tie, his salt and pepper hair combed perfectly. His face, usually smug, was tight with restrained irritation. At 52, he still carried the elegance of a wealthy businessman, but beneath it simmered a temper sharpened by years of getting whatever he wanted. His top lawyer, Richard Price, was a tall man with slicked-back blonde hair, a razor-thin smile, and the kind of confidence found in men who had never lost a high-profile case. Price had represented mining companies, oil corporations, and politicians. His specialty was burying the truth under layers of legal complexity. When the judge entered, Honorable Judge Helen Carver, a stern woman in her early 60s with gray curls tucked behind her ears and deep, thoughtful lines around her mouth. The room fell silent. Judge Carver was known for two things: fairness and an intolerance for arrogance. She glanced between the two sides, her steel blue eyes lingering briefly on Jack before turning to Ethan, as if she already sensed the imbalance of power. The trial began with Price's attempt to dismantle Jack's credibility, portraying him as a traumatized veteran seeking revenge. He spoke smoothly about emotional instability, misinterpretation of documents, and the tragic but accidental fire. Jack listened without reacting, but Rex's ears tilted back in dislike. Catherine struck back immediately. Her voice was steady, calm, and lethal. She presented the first wave of evidence: forged financial documents, suspicious loan transactions, and handwritten notes by Jack's father showing discrepancies Ethan had tried to hide. Catherine explained every detail with clinical precision, breaking decades of corruption into pieces the courtroom could clearly see. Next came the illegal contracts, signed under pressure, backdated, manipulated. Judge Carver frowned as she read them. Price tried to object repeatedly, but the judge shut him down each time with clipped authority. Then came the mineral surveys. Catherine unrolled the large geological map, the one Jack found hidden in the underground bunker. Gasps rippled through the room as she detailed the estimated copper, nickel, and rare mineral values. Price tried to argue the map was fabricated until Catherine slammed down the original Denver email chain. Each email bore Ethan's digital signature. But the turning point came when Catherine connected the timeline of the electrical maintenance invoice to the night of the warehouse fire. She pointed out inconsistencies, forged signatures, and the technician who had died years before the supposed work was done. The room shifted. Everyone felt it. Ethan's expression cracked for the first time, a flicker of fear flashing across his eyes. Finally, Catherine inserted the USB drive Jack's father had hidden. The screen lit up with video footage. Henry Morgan speaking in his workshop, eyes tired but resolute. He spoke of being pressured, of discovering the truth about Ethan's intentions, of planning to contact investigators. The recording ended abruptly mid-sentence, taken only 2 days before the fire. The courtroom fell silent. Not even Ethan's lawyers spoke. Judge Carver allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of what they had all witnessed settle fully. Then she read from her notes, voice firm and unwavering. She cited financial fraud, coercion, concealment of geological assets, breach of contract, and sufficient evidence to suspect criminal negligence connected to the fire. The verdict was devastating for Ethan. All mineral rights and properties associated with Morgan Manufacturing are hereby returned to Jack Morgan, Carver pronounced. Ethan Harlow is ordered to forfeit related assets pending criminal investigation. This court also rules that the cabin land deed is valid and permanent, and that Mr. Morgan retains sole ownership of the property and all mineral resources beneath it. Ethan surged to his feet, face flushed with rage, but Judge Carver slammed her gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Harlow, you have done enough." Security moved in as Ethan shouted that Jack would regret this, but his voice faded as he was escorted out, surrounded by stunned reporters. Sarah gripped Jack's shoulder. Samuel whispered, "Justice at last." When it was all over, Jack returned to his cabin with Rex trotting proudly beside him. Snow was gently falling again, coating the roof Jack had repaired with his own hands. Warm firelight glowed softly through the window. Jack placed a hand on Rex's head, his voice a quiet promise carried into the cold mountain air. "We're finally home, Rex. In life, there are moments when everything seems lost. Family, hope, trust, or the future we once imagined for ourselves." Jack stood on that edge too. But it is often in our darkest valleys that God plants a small seed of light, one we may not recognize at first. A broken cabin that others saw as worthless became the place where God hid truth, justice, and a new beginning. Miracles don't always arrive with thunder and lightning. They sometimes come through courage, through loyalty, through the quiet strength of a good heart, or through the people who stand beside us when the world turns away. As the scripture reminds us, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. If you are facing loss, betrayal, loneliness, or injustice, remember that God is still with you. He sees every tear, every silent prayer, and every moment you feel forgotten. His plan may not reveal itself all at once, but His presence never leaves us. Every miracle begins with standing up one more time. Every victory begins with unwavering faith. Every new day is a reminder that God is still guiding us. If this story touched your heart, I kindly invite you to share the video to spread light and hope. Leave a comment about what spoke to you the most. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more stories of healing, faith, and kindness. And above all, may God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps wherever life takes you. May His grace rest upon you and your family today and always.